Hey all, I thought I'd kick this out for you guys quickly for my online students. A little note here on tariffs, kind of, topic of the week. Their sort of their function and their impact and the politics of tariffs, right? So we know, right, that Donald Trump has become, I'll be honest, kind of obsessed with tariffs as like the primary tool of American foreign policy. Okay, it's almost like someone gets a hammer, right? And they get so excited about that hammer, right? That everything around them starts to look like a nail. Everything looks like a nail, right? So that's kind of Trump and tariffs, right? He has come rather somewhat suddenly to just be obsessed with tariffs as the tool that can do it all. The one tool that you need for American foreign policy. It's a hammer, and every damn thing is a nail. Got a problem in this area? You need a hammer. Got a problem in that area? Hammer. You got a screw over there that needs screwing in? Oddly enough, a hammer. Now look, a hammer can be fantastic if it's used selectively and carefully and in a smart way, but a hammer used for everything is probably not going to sometimes work. All right, so that's my own metaphor. I'm not necessarily against tariffs. Tariffs can be a useful tool of American foreign policy, or for any nation. Right? I think used in a targeted way, selectively, to perhaps help promote certain emerging industries that are early days, and you want to protect, the American efforts to get started in that industry so they can be globally competitive over time. Maybe give them some early protection from global competition so they can get on their feet and get rolling. I could see that, time limited. What was it? President Biden helped push through Congress in bipartisan fashion something called the CHIPS Act, right? That said, when it comes to high-tech microchips, we need to put limits on imports and tariffs on imports of those chips from places like China, because America needs to develop its own high-tech microchip industry, because, right, that's critical to the functioning of our military and therefore critical to our national security. So you might want to nurture that microchip industry here, protect it a bit from global competition, so we develop a domestic source, so that if push comes to shove down the road, right, we don't have to rely on adversaries for microchips that we need to run our military. So, in selected, sort of targeted ways, they can make sense, There's some other considerations there, like you would say, sometimes it might make sense to put some tariffs on Chinese imports, right, because one of the ways that China outcompetes us on manufacturing, right, is that they pay their people so little money, and they have no significant environmental protections, right? So it can be cheap to produce things over there because they have some, I think, unfair advantages, right? The American worker is well paid, and we have pretty strict environmental regulations, right? So it costs more to produce things here. So it doesn't seem entirely fair, right, to allow China to flood our markets with cheap goods when it's done in a way that's not like on an equal playing field. So, some tariffs there maybe. All right. But Trump is like, no, for everything. It applied to everybody. So, quick things. Right, he had announced massive tariffs on Mexico and Canada. Mexico and Canada are our friends. They are our neighbors. They're the good guys, right? They've been by our side for decade after decade now. I think we should treat them with a little respect and not try to bully them with tariff threats. All right? The historic role of the U.S. coming out of World War II is to provide global leadership for constitutional democracies across the world. It was the U.S. as the essential nation in that leadership role. Right? Strengthen our fellow constitutional democracies with whom we have shared values, because if we stand together, right, we can be stronger against our autocratic adversaries like Russia and China. So, look, I understand that we're going to take a more hostile approach towards China on tariffs. Cool dealio. Same with Russia. Great. But our friends, our allies, those who've stood by us for so long and allowed us to become a large and powerful and affluent nation, and now to treat them just like we treat China and Russia, I'm not about that. So that's number one. We should really think about that, using tariffs in an aggressive and bullying way towards our friends Is that how you treat your friends? Do you bully them pretty regularly to get what you want? Probably not, because then they're not going to be your friends for very long. Right? They're not going to trust you anymore. They may start to form economic bonds with China and Russia. Because they're like, well, we know they're assholes. And now you are too. So why not create more bonds with autocracies? So we don't want that, do we? We don't want to push Canada and Mexico into the arms of our opponents. So number one, a little respect. I think that has to be thought about. If we want to continue to play that global leadership role as the essential nation, which we have done since the end of World War II, and it's served us extremely well. It served us extremely well. We are the world's most affluent, most militarily powerful country in the world, largely because of our leadership role in global politics and forming alliances with our buddies. Right? I always tell people, look, it's not obvious to think about this unless you study international relations. But having Mexico as our southern neighbor and Canada as our northern neighbor has been very good for America. They are important trade partners. They've made us rich. We've also helped them do well. Win-win. Something that we don't often think about for sure, right, is that our ability to project American military power across the globe. And look, we can have a debate about when we should do that and when we shouldn't, when it's advisable and when it's inadvisable, of course. But undoubtedly, right, our ability to project our military power across the world has been deeply facilitated by the fact that we face no threat of invasion here in North America, right? We can send, our entire damn military to points around the globe because we don't have to worry about being invaded by Canada and Mexico. We don't have that near geographic threat. So we can project our military force, right, with impunity. That's not true over in Europe, right, or in Asia, where often countries need to leave a lot of their military back home to protect against hostile neighbors. Imagine if China was to our south and Russia was to our north. Right? We would need to leave most of our military on those two borders all the time. Our ability to protect our power across the globe militarily would be severely limited. So think about that. Don't be so hard on Canada and Mexico. What if instead they were China and Russia? It makes your head explode, right? So again, a little respect towards our buddies. Treat them a little more decently as a co-equal. Yeah, we're obviously more powerful, right? Our economy is much larger. We have lots of leverage already without becoming abusive about it and bullying. These are my thoughts. But shit, that's really that we need to think about. And we're going to be smart, thoughtful citizens of our democracy. Tariffs can also be problematic, right, for consumers. Trump will always say we have trade deficits with other countries in the world. We do. Because we're affluent. We're extremely affluent, right? So we have a lot of consumer demand for cheap goods, right? So we benefit from that, don't we? Importing tons of goods from Mexico, Canada, and China. It benefits all of us because all of us are American consumers. That's been a huge boon. So do we run trade deficits with these countries? Yes, we do. Because it's expensive to produce things here. Right? So we don't export as much as we import because we're so wealthy. It's not a bad thing necessarily. Come on, think about it, right? Think about it. An economist from a long time ago, Ricardo, said, hey, right, what global trade allows for is specialization by each country and what they can produce most efficiently and most cheaply. Right? So we're not as good anymore, right, at producing basic goods super cheaply. That's no longer in our wheelhouse because our labor force is well paid and we're affluent, right? So we are going to run trade deficits, but it benefits us. We've become wealthy with these trade deficits. Trade deficits in and of themselves are not a problem. It makes the American lifestyle go way up for consumers, and we're all consumers. So I would not freak out about trade deficits. The best way to get rid of them would be for us to become very poor. If we became very poor like China, and there's a lot of countries poorer than China, but compared to us, China's as poor as dirt. If we were a lot poorer, we could manufacture things more cheaply and export a lot more. Yay! The solution is worse than the problem. There's not even necessarily a problem with trade deficits. Think about it, right? Think about this shit. Yeah, and when you have tariffs on companies bringing goods into the United States from countries like China, Mexico, and Canada, right? Those payments are made by these companies, not the countries, but the companies, to the U.S. government. So the U.S. government gets revenue. Great. U.S. government gets revenue. But the problem is, right, when you put these tariffs on imports to America, right, these private companies now need to charge a lot more for their product in America. Right? So if you put a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, all the goods that private companies in those two countries bring into our country, right, the price would go up by about 25%. It would make American goods, right, produced here for a local audience more competitive, but again, more expensive. So ultimately, the American consumer pays the freight for tariffs, because invariably, right, tariffs drive up prices for goods. So the American consumer, right, it's almost like what some have said, it's like a sales tax. Tariffs are like a sales tax. It's like almost like it's an indirect method of transferring the money of the American people to the federal government, right? Because the federal government collects the tariffs, but then the goods being sold here go up similarly, and the consumer, to access these goods, has to pay that amount, the higher amount, right? So in a sense, indirectly, it's like it's a tax by the federal government on the American consumer, and we're all consumers. So something to think about. Again, I'm not necessarily against all tariffs. They can be done in a targeted and smart way, no question. And I'd be more willing to put them, I suppose, on adversaries like China, but way less supportive of putting them on our friends and allies, unless it's completely necessary. Another part of tariffs that is fairly problematic, right? What did Canada say when we said we're putting a 25% tariff on all Canadian imports? They said, well, we'll do the same for efforts by the U.S. companies to sell goods in Canada. Right? Retaliatory tariffs. Now, would we come out ahead in a sense because we have a bigger economy? Yes. The Canadian economy would have been way more devastated than the American economy. Yay! Like we really want to devastate Canada's economy. What's the gain there? That might produce more illegal immigration from Canada, right? If they became a lot poorer. Oh shoot, where was I going with that? But I've really lost the thread on that one. Damn it. So tariffs are just problematic in a number of ways. And remember, right? The original sort of thinker on this is Adam Smith, his epic volume on the wealth of nations. He says, from whence comes the wealth of nations? From global free trade. Right? What was he arguing against at that time? The year 1776, interestingly enough. He was arguing against mercantilism. What's mercantilism? Things like tariffs and quotas on imports and that kind of thing. Right? When nations erect trade barriers, he said, everybody suffers. Oh, yeah, retaliatory tariffs by other countries. Retaliatory tariffs by other countries. What do they say? It's almost like we start, right? We poke Canada in the eye and we blind them with our tariffs. They poke us in the eye and they blind us. Right? We put tariffs on Mexico, they put tariffs on us. We put tariffs on China, they put tariffs on us. You start to dry up global trade. And America, I'm telling you people, no country more than America has benefited from global trade since the end of World War II. Global free trade has been massively beneficial to the United States. We've benefited more than any other country in the world. You could say, but it could be better, maybe. But comparatively, no one's done better than the U.S. under the terms of global free trade since the end of World War II. I don't know. We don't live in a utopian land here, in a utopian world. Comparatively, we've killed it. Killed it. So I say don't kill the goose that laid the golden egg. Be a little bit careful here. There's a lot of risk with the imposition of tariffs. And again, Not necessarily opposed to all tariffs, but targeted, maybe time-limited tariffs can make sense. Be a bit more aggressive, maybe, towards our adversaries, because they are our adversaries. But again, even though China in many ways is an adversary, they have helped make America very wealthy indeed. They've raised our standard of living dramatically by providing us with incredibly cheap televisions and cell phones and all sorts of other consumer goods. My God. We take that for granted. We shouldn't. We shouldn't. What if you could only buy TVs manufactured in America? The price would go up dramatically. What if we could only purchase cell phones made in America? The price would go up dramatically. We'd be very unhappy. We'd have potentially runaway inflation. All sorts of bad mojo there. So let's think about this. All right? Tariffs can be a very good hammer of foreign policy and economic policy, but they should be used carefully and in a smart way. And not indiscriminately, because once you have a hammer, every damn thing looks like a nail. Cautionary note here is all I'm suggesting. Oh yeah, and these alleged concessions that we just got from Canada and Mexico, it looks like these were things they were already doing or already planning to do. Right? It's not clear that we got much of anything out of those threats. Mexico had surged 10,000 troops to the border under President Biden in 2021 at the request of the Biden administration through normal channels of diplomacy, absent tariff threats. Mexico, I'm sorry, yeah, that was Mexico. Did I say Canada? I'm losing track here. I'm tired. Mexico had already done that under the Biden administration voluntarily using normal diplomacy. Canada had already committed $1.3 billion to tighter border control up north in December. They committed to that in December. Okay, they didn't need tariff threats. They were already there. They were already there. So what I think Trump is doing, he's making these outrageous threats. He's backing down at the last minute and saying that he got all sorts of concessions. Not clear that he did. Looks to me like performative politics, right? To me, the worst kind of performative politics, where he's putting on a show for his MAGA fan base. I guess his supporters all hyped, but it's not clear that there's much substance there. Doesn't that describe his entire career as a businessman? A lot of hype and not a lot of substance. Doesn't that define Trump in many ways? And he's 78 now, so he's never going to change. It strikes me as a whole lot of hot air and very little substance at all, with a huge amount of downside risk using this tool of threatened or actual tariffs for nebulous and questionable gains and a whole lot of risk. So just some stuff to think about. Take care.